Evening, everybody. We start now. Thank you so much for coming to our first 2025 Artist of the Month talk. I'm happy to introduce David Munyak, our Artist of the Month this month. And David lives in Middletown Springs, and he is a wood turner. Wonderful.
Is that okay right now?
I think so. And without any further ado, here is David Munyak.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. I appreciate your interest in what I'm hopefully going to say. And if it's not interesting, you can feel free to leave. I have no aspirations. And a couple of housekeeping things. Please mind the cord here if you're moving around. And at some point later on, when I'm done, you can come up and inspect some of the things I have up here. And you feel free to handle the tools, but please be careful because they are sharp. I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I'm very pleased to be a member of this gallery. I've been in here about 18 months or so now, and it's just it's a wonderful place. I've been in a number of galleries before, and I think this is the best run gallery I've been in. And there's a great energy to it. Everybody's enthusiastic, and you know, I know the town has recently been refurbished, and so I think it plays off, each of those things play off one off the other, and it makes for a better experience for everyone. Specifically, thank you to Althea and to Beth, Althea for your leadership, and Beth and Buffy for your display taken care of, and I want to thank Bonnie for doing a wonderful video. If you go to my page on the Artists Guild website, you'll see a little video that's about 5 minutes long, and it shows me doing some of the things that you'll see in these slides. So if you have an interest in that, please take a look. And thank you to Carrie for doing such a great job on promoting this event. We appreciate it. So I've got a bunch of slides of some previous work that I did, and I hope you'll suffer through it. But it's been an interesting journey for me, and it kind of, I think, is important to know where I came from. So the first place I came from is New Jersey. So everybody here is from New Jersey. No kidding. Wow. All right. Well, then you recognize her. And right here is Perth Amboy, and that's where I grew up. And here's Perth Amboy. And as I was Googling this to get these little maps, I was amazed that this building popped up as a site in Perth Amboy. And this is the proprietary house. And it is the last remaining proprietor's governor's house. So before the revolution, we were all under English control, and there were royal governors that were, you know, appointed by the king or queen in the 13 colonies. And this is the last building that was occupied by a royal governor that's still standing. It was built in 1762 to 64. It was home to William Franklin, Benjamin Franklin's son, who was the royal governor of East Jersey right before the Revolution. And then he was arrested and sent to Connecticut, where he was in prison for a while before he eventually got out. After he was arrested, the building served as headquarters for both General Hugh Mercer of the American side and British General Sir William Howe on the British side. So why am I telling you this? Well, because it ties into my story, and you'll see that in a slide or two. But I want to point out. So here's here's First Amboy, and here's the Arthur Kill and the Raritan River, and the Raritan Bay is out here in the ocean. So the Perth Amboy was an important spot in that time. And so, you know, the governor's house is right down here by the water. And I lived here when I grew up. And then I lived here, which is outside of Perth Amboy, so not too far from my home until I moved to Vermont in 2004. But I want to point out this window at the top of the original portion of the building. This is an addition, and you'll see why I'm doing that in a moment. I started my college career in NJIT, and then I went to Rutgers, and at the time it was Cook College, and I still call it Cook College, because they changed it to the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, which is too long to say, so they call it SEBS, S-E-B-S. Now, I don't want to be from a school called SEBS, so I'm from Cook, and always will be. And I went there for landscape architecture and graduated happily. Around that time that I was in school, I built this vanity cabinet for my mother and father. My father built this house. He started it in the 50s, and he finished, quote unquote, finished it in the 80s. It was a long process, but it was a weekend project that we lived an hour and a quarter away, and you know the way these things go, and life gets in the way. But that was my first, real woodworking project. I had done a lot of stuff before that, but not on that scale, and I was pretty proud of it. These are under construction. This is after it was stained and the tile put on. Unfortunately, the photos are not that pretty. At the same time, I was working as a union partner, which is how I put myself through school. And I did, it was mostly heavy construction, commercial and industrial stuff, warehouses, office buildings, hotels, refineries. And I did a lot of concrete formwork and a lot of sheetrock, did some ceiling tile, did some scaffolding in a refinery in Port Reading. I retired from the union in 2022, and so I actually get a pension check. They send me $250 a month. And I tell you what, I just don't know what to do with it. But I didn't really work through the hall very long. In fact, this was my last job with the union, which was in 1988. Now, remember that half-round window I was pointing out in the proprietary house? I was the one that sheetrocked that on the inside during the renovations in 1988. So you see how I thought when I saw that, like, wow, that's really cool. I gotta show this. And this was, I installed this flooring and brick hearth in the one of the basement rooms. This was the original antique interior shutters that needed restoration, and I put new splines in and I did some other work on those. This is just a view of the front hall and the inside of the front doorway. It's a beautiful building, and they actually just did a bunch of renovation on the outside to restore the exterior. And they do tours and stuff, so you should, if you're ever in that area, you should stop in. After that, I went out on my own and I started a landscape design and construction company. And I did a lot of brickwork, brick walks, dry laid brick walks, front walks. Note the curves. Because my mantra is I'm in search of perfect curves. So even back then, I was doing a lot of curves. So here was a circular patio with an integrated area that leads to the stairs. This is cutting the brickwork to install the border in the circular patio. Do that with a saw with a diamond blade. A couple of details here of some of the cutting and the brickwork. This was, I did all the planters and the brick and the lattice work in the back and the fencing and the door and garage. Did also some stone paving, dry laid stone. This was blue stone. Some stone walls. And some outdoor woodworks. This was an arbor. I didn't design this arbor, but I pretty much built it. Arch top, got in-grill benches, set of gates, and brick patio. That actually one of my classes installed when I was teaching at Rutgers. I was an adjunct instructor for a while at Rutgers after I graduated. Here's a deck that I built, which is curved to fit a curved above ground pool. Some redwood lattice panels for to dress up a blank ugly wall on a woman's house. So as you know, as with everything, you do what you have to do to get along. And so you know, I took other jobs, and I always loved woodwork. So when I would get somebody that wanted something out of wood, I was happy to accommodate them. So I did some bookcases. So this was a built-in bookcase with crown molding, some cupboards under here. This was a little thing to slide out with the guy's phonograph, you know, a little phonograph that he would play his records on. This one was a little smaller, but also had some cupboards at the bottom. And these are paint grade, so you know, this was all before it was painted. This is not finished. This one here was quite a challenge because it was three bays of shelving plus a corner, and it had a lot of detail. These columns are fluted, you can't really see it, but there's a lot of molding here and here. Crown molding went all around the room, raised panel doors and cupboards below, and here's the corner, and this was a computer station with a slide-out keyboard. You can see how old this photo is from the monitor. Yeah. So, but that was a very nice project, and I enjoyed working on that. Did a couple of fireplace panels. Here's a colonial style one with food columns and some molding at the top. And this one is a craftsman style. For seeing that. That's all made out of white oak. And I did a number of kitchens. This one did built all the cabinets, did the tile work, tile floor, made the table, and a bunch of other sheetrocking and all sorts of stuff. My deal was, if you want me to do your kitchen, that's fine, but it's only if I get to build the cabinets. I'm not going to go install some particle board stuff from Home Depot. So another view of that, and also the table. Now this one was laminate. Very small kitchen, but it was efficient, and you know, we squeezed a lot of stuff into that little kitchen. The glass block was a nice detail. That was there before I got involved, but we worked with that, and had a laminate backsplash as well, so easy to clean. Again, these are, you know, this is quite old, so it's not the style today, but it was more in style at the time. This is probably the most elaborate kitchen that I did, and it was for a former professor of mine, who's actually a good friend and now passed away. But so this is the breakfast nook. Now I installed that window for them to be able to look out. They had a brick patio that one of my friends had built outside that window, and it was all the brickwork was cut to have a design. I can't remember what the design is, to tell you the truth, but it was, you know, it's not just crisscross, it's like a picture. It's like doing a mosaic or inlaid, like inlaid wood, that type of thing. So they needed a window, and they needed a place to be able to sit. I built a table as well, and there were a lot of nice details. There was a lot of nice details in the kitchen. You know, behind the chair here is a bookcase. They could have the cookbooks. There was a lot of, this was the edge of this door is this door here. So this was a pantry cabinet for storage. The seats had flip up seat and flip down back so that they could store things. It was not a big house and it was not a big kitchen. and you know, every inch counts when you're trying to squeeze stuff in there. This is a sink island, again, another set of shelves and cabinets with glass doors, little swing out sponge holder for the sink. This is a little wasted space in between here because of the angle, but I put a set of doors on it that fold back, and you know, good spot for little things like that, right? That don't fit anywhere else easily. So no space wasted. This is standing in the nook looking at the other side of the kitchen with the stove and the range hood. And I like drawers for pots and pans, you know. I know that, like today now, this is like a thing, right? You see this a lot, but this was, you know, 25 years ago. I don't know that people were putting pots in drawers, but she loved it, and I loved it. So it's a great way to maximize space. So, you know, here's your oven cabinet, and, you know, what do you do with the space underneath there because it's so deep? Well, it makes a great place for your recycling, so you have to pull out for that. And then looking out toward, looking out toward the front of the house, where these two windows are, these were very high cabinets, probably 42 inches, but only about 9 inches deep. So, you know, good for cans and jars and small stuff that gets lost in most cabinets. So then I went on to try to do more furniture, and well, the first thing you need is a bench. So this is based on Frank Klaus bench. I don't know if anybody who's a woodworker remembers Frank Klaus. Yeah. He was a Hungarian and did a lot of books and videos for Taunton Press, and he's from New Jersey too, not too far north of where I was. So, so that's based on his design. It's got a maple top with a curly maple apron around it, and chestnut legs and white oak feet. So now that I had a bench, I could build some furniture. So this is a vanity table, all out of curly maple, and you know, it has, you know, kind of a stylized cabriolet, and the front, the drawers and the apron are all out of one board that I cut up so that the grain matches as you look at it. And then the poles were hand carved out of some dark hardwood that I can't remember what it was, maybe rosewood or coca-cola, I don't remember for sure. This is not a garden bench. Some people thought that it was when I showed it once before because it's out in the garden, but it's actually a futon frame. And I took it out to there to take pictures because I had no room for it. So this seat slides out and turns that into the place for the futon. So, you know, normally, you know, the futon is on here in this way, and of course the futon covers up the nice detail, but you see it from the back if you have it out in the middle of the room. But then you can flip it out and have a bed. So this is for people who, you know, need a space for a guest, but 99% of the time they're sitting on it as a couch. And, you know, I didn't want one of those nasty looking fold-up things. So here's a craftsman style counter height table for a woman who didn't want an island in her kitchen. And so we did that, and she was happy with it. And a pair of mahogany nightstands, dovetailed drawers, built a marimba. My brother-in-law was a musician, and he was teaching students percussion, and part of that is using a marimba, and he had a student marimba that he was either selling or renting out to them, and wanted to know if I could build some, which I did, obviously, but not for the price he was willing to pay. So that's in our guest room. Now this piece was a very special piece. Actually, there's two pieces. It's a set of matching chests. These are approximately 24 inches tall and probably, I don't know, 30 to 36 wide and 18 inches deep or so. It's all mahogany with a cigar-figured kaya which is a type of mahogany veneer top, and on the fronts have the recipient's initials carved in it. And this is the other one, matching pair. That's one of Mark's. They were made out of 2 boards of mahogany, Honduras mahogany, 21 inches wide, and I forget, 12 or 14 feet long. And they had dovetail corners, hand cut, graduated sizes, and a sunburst cross mahogany veneered interior panel. So the top and the bottom of the lid panel was veneered and set into these frames. So that's the one, that's the other. And then there's a lot of carving on the inside. So there's a boy's name, there's a little Celtic knot, there's a saying, love and light from mom. And down here is a date and a set of initials. And so what this was a friend of mine, a woman who, her husband, who was only, well, let's see what it says, 62 to 96, so what's that, 34? He was killed on the New Jersey Turnpike. He was driving along in his van, and a tractor trailer on the opposite side of the highway going in the other direction lost a tire, and it bounced across the road and hit him right in the windshield, and that was the end of it. So he had one boy was just a few years old, and the other one was an infant at the time that he was killed, and so his wife contacted me a few years later and asked me to build a chest for each of her sons to put mementos from their father in. And, so, you know, it had a lot of meaning. So I spent a lot of time, you know, there was a lot of carving, each boy's name, and, you know, the inscription. And both chests had, were lined with curly maple, so when you opened the chest, it was like a light-filled chest, signifying that experience. And a sliding till with a little box with a lid for, you know, keeping small special items. So, you know, each lid was a book matched bit of curly maple with a hand carved thumb lid. So then I moved to Vermont in 2004, and there's Middletown Springs for anyone who isn't sure. And right now we're in Brandon, which is about there. Oops, wrong direction. So since I've been here, I built only a couple things furniture-wise. This is a butcher block table that some folks use in the center of their kitchen. It's got an 8-inch thick vertical grain butcher block top. The table is 36 by 42. I calculated the weight once, but I don't remember what it is, but it's not something you want to try to pick up yourself. Luckily, it happened at a time when I was able to do a lot of designing on a computer, so I can show you the drawings. All the drawings for the other things I've showed you are on paper, and no way to really display that. And then this was another small table project for a friend who was using one of these big egg things to cook stuff. And, you know, so you have the table with a hole in it for the egg. So he decided after a few years he didn't like the egg anymore, so now he has a table with a hole in it. But, you know, there's ways that you can, you know, I could either make an insert, or you could get a piece of stone or something cut and it could fit. You know? So, a little set of drawings for that. So. Okay, wood turning, finally, yay! All right, in Y2K, remember Y2K? Who went out and bought a generator in Y2K? Besides me. My friend Tony took me for a spin. So he calls me up and he's like, hey, I'm doing a class, an adult class at the community school, or what do you call it? It was like one of those community colleges. And they had a shop there, and he was taking some sort of class and doing building projects. He says, come on, we'll get some Chinese food and you'll come with me to the class. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? He's like, I got a piece of wood, and you'll turn it, you'll put it on the lathe. I was like, but I'm not signed up for the class, Tony. He's like, oh, don't worry about it, you know. So we go, and we get our food, we go to the thing, and he says to the instructor, hey, this is my friend Dave, you know, he's gonna use the lathe, all right? The guy's like, huh? Like, I can't believe you let me do it, but he did. And first time I'd ever put my hands on a lathe, I don't remember what kind of tools I used. I don't remember what he told me, which if he told me anything, I'm sure it was very little, because he didn't know how to turn either. And what I do remember is the lathe just bouncing up and down as I was doing whatever I was doing, which tells me now that I know more, I was doing it wrong. Okay? But I came out with that. So he gave me this piece of cherry. Now, if you look closely, you can see that there's the center of the tree. That's the pith. So this was a branch, because it wasn't very big, and this is the sapwood on the outside. And it was rotted partly, because this is all punky and spalted. And I didn't get very deep, because God knows what tool I was using, you know. But the shape wasn't too bad. So, you know, I said, okay, right? So then, not too long after that, he calls me up and he says, hey, let's go to do a woodcraft class. So the woodcraft store where you can buy tools, they run these little, you know, programs where you can go in and do something. And this was a little more successful. So first of all, it was a piece of mahogany, and we were turning it with the grain running vertically, and which is a lot easier. And they actually had tools, and they actually had somebody who could tell me what the tools did and how I should be using them. So, you know, it was a little bit more of a success. So that was my second use. So then I went to visit a friend in New Mexico that same year. This was now in like July of 2000. And he had a wood shop, and I spent some time with him about a week. And I did some turning there out of some scraps that he had. So here's number 3 through 6, which was a set of little small salad bowls made out of aspen. And number 7 was made out of mahogany, a little bowl with a little bulbous bottom. And number 9 was a sycamore bowl, which I had. Oh, as a matter of fact, I have these. I meant to pass these around. So this is number 1, so you can handle that. And then this is number 2. Yeah, you know, I can't believe I saved it, but you know, I'm the sort of person that does stuff like that. And then this is this one here. This is the sycamore. So, and then these were 2 little curly maple plates, you know, like just about, you know, maybe 7 inches in diameter, and a little walnut bowl. So all, you know, all about the same size as that, not very large. But it was fun, and I really enjoyed it. There was something about that process of turning and seeing the shape turn into something that I found fascinating. So a couple years later, in December of 2003, I bought myself a lathe. So here's a lathe, and I don't know if anybody's ever seen or used. Has anybody used a lathe? Yeah? Come on. Oh, good for you. Excellent. So for those that don't know, so this is the headstock. Well, here I can do the head. So, whoops. Oh, wait. Here's the headstock. So the headstock consists of the motor and the controller and a shaft that you can attach things to. And this is the tailstock, and this slides back and forth, and you can trap things between the headstock and the tailstock. This lathe, also the headstock can slide, so you'll see a little bit later what that'll do. This is called the bed of the lathe, and there's a gap between the 2 sides that allows the banjo and the tool rest to stay on the lathe and slide back and forth and be trapped. So the tool rest is what you set the tool on while the wood is spinning there in headstock. So the fun thing about turning is that unlike other kinds of woodworking where you have a piece of wood and you have a motorized saw that's cutting it, or even a hand saw, it's the saw that's moving, that's doing the cutting. Skill saw, table saw, band saw, the blade is what's moving. Here, the wood is moving, and the tool is held stationary. So it's really like the only thing I can think of where that happens. So this is what the real one looks like. It is the same lathe, but obviously modified slightly. I've got it up on blocks because I'm tall, and it's got a lot of repairs on it because things have gone wacky over the years. And I've got all my tools assembled behind the lathe so I can reach them easily. I've got all my chucks down here and a bunch of little things up here, and here's all my gouges and stuff. So then I bought some tools, and so what you need is things to hold the work. So the first thing is chucks, and here's 4 different chucks that all operate pretty much the same, but they have different size jaws. These 3 are the same chuck, so you can actually interchange these jaws, but at some point it just becomes annoying to have to keep stopping and changing jaws. And you know, when you're trying to get things done, it's easier to just bite the bullet and buy another chuck and have a separate chuck. This one's a little smaller, so those are up here, and you can have a look at those later if you want to. And then there are centers. This is a 4-spur center and a tail center. And how that works is this. So notice there's a taper on here, right? So this headstock has a hole in the shaft, and that tapered piece fits in there, and by friction it just stays in place. And the same with the one on the tailstock. This is a rotating center. This has bearings in it, and so it spins with the work. This one is not rotating, so as the shaft spins, it spins and it drives the work. So if you're doing something like this, where you're doing a stair spindle, you have the headstock over here and the tailstock over there, and the pressure of the 2 of them are holding that wood tight against that spur center, and that spur center is rotating and it's spinning the wood so that you can work with it. But you can't do it without the tailstock, as opposed to the chuck, where you can have that chuck hold the wood and you don't necessarily need the tailstock. Sometimes it's good to have. And then there's other little gadgets, like here's a Jacobs chuck that'll fit in that headstock, and you can put a drill in there if you need to push the wood in and drill something. You can put little attachments on it. There's a little sanding disc that I use to sand off the bottoms of things. Then you need some cutting tools. So we have gouges. So here's a couple of gouges. You can take a look at them later. There's a 3/4 inch bowl gouge, a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and I'm sorry, 3/4 inch bowl gouge, a 5/8 bowl gouge, and a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. So here's the bowl gouge, spindle gouge. So you can see that the way the grind is here on the tip is important, and this is a swept back line on these 2. And the spindle gouge is a little different. Here's the bowl gouge, spindle gouge. Note the deep U in the flute on both of these, and on the spindle gouge it's much shallower. These are all made out of solid pieces of bar stock, steel bar stock, and the flutes are milled in. So it's a very stout, sturdy tool. Now here's a spindle roughing gouge, which is only for doing spindle work, like that stair rail spindle that I was showing you. Note the difference. This has a very blunt end and a very steep cutting angle and a much rounder, shallower flute. But most different is the fact that you notice this is not made of solid bar stock. This is a piece of flat steel that's been bent up into a curved shape to make the flute. And here's this little tang where the little tang goes into the handle. And why that matters is that people that don't know what they're doing will take this and use it on a bowl. And if you use it on the inside of the bowl and you get a catch, it could snap that tang right off and then throw that gouge back at you, and you know, it's not fun. So it's important for people to understand the differences. Then we have scrapers, which are nothing more than 3/8 inch thick by whatever width, 1.5 inch steel flat bar. And then the grinds on these, this is you know, a fairly medium kind of a grind, and there's a little grind on the top. And I'm not going to get into the details, but that helps to get a nicer, cleaner finish. And you use these primarily for cleaning up at the end after you've done most of your cutting to get a smooth surface. And there's one or two of those up here as well. Skew chisels, these are essentially beveled on both sides. Here, this is standing up on edge and you can see it beveled on both sides. Those are used for paring cuts and for spindle work. And then there's parting tools. So this is a small, narrow parting tool, and this is a little wider diamond parting tool. And you can see the diamond parting tool has a kind of a diamond shape, and the other one is flat on two sides. And that's basically for separating pieces of wood when you're doing spindle trim. So, where do I get my wood? Everybody's always curious about that. Well, one place is out of my firewood pile. We heat with wood, and we used to buy 7 cords of logs about every 2 years, and you know, cut and split it ourselves. And as I'm cutting and splitting, I'm going, oh, here's a nice piece. Set that aside, you know. Maybe I might get something nice out of it. So that's getting logs delivered. Sometimes people have things that they offer me, and I go cut them up myself and bring them home in the truck. This was a bunch of cherry. This was some very, very large stumps, not burls, no, but just, you know, large sections of trunk of a neighbor nearby who was the power company was removing them, maple. This was cherry that I got from another neighbor, loaded it, you know, on the truck with a little machine, and you know, fairly sizable. Sometimes I have my lovely assistant, Jenny. Where is she? There she is in the back. That's my wife Jenny in the back there, and I have her helping me. This was picking up some maple off our town office project lot a couple of years ago. And here was a nice big piece of maple, and my cat Mom too was helping. She always was very good about making sure I was doing the right thing. This was a pretty good sized piece. This was 24 inches in diameter, and you know, 8 feet long. So it took a little maneuvering to get it in and get it out. I don't remember how I got it in because I didn't have a machine there. I guess somebody else must have. But you know, getting it out, it's nice to have some kind of a tractor. And it's important to try to keep the drying to a minimum until you can get to it. It's best to turn things while the wood is still green or wet, very wet. The wetter the better, really. And because then you can control the drying. If you let it start to dry, it's going to dry out, the end grain is going to dry out first, and it starts to get cracks and checks, and so then you have to lose a certain amount of material to get back to sound wood. So some people use products to put on there. They'll paint the ends, or they'll buy this special armor seal or whatever they call it, anchor seal, and wax and stuff. And I don't bother with any of that. I figure I get so much wood that I'm not going to waste my time and money putting stuff on it that later on, like, am I going to put this into my wood furnace now that it has paint all over it? So then what do I do with it? You know, do I put it in the landfill? Yeah, I don't want to do any of that stuff. So, preparing blanks. So for small blanks, so here's a piece of cherry sitting on my workbench, which you saw earlier. I draw a line somewhere in the center and get it over on the bandsaw and cut it in half. It's nice to have a fairly wide blade. That's a 1-inch blade on that saw when you're cutting something heavy like that, because it doesn't deflect as much as a thinner blade will. And on this saw right now I've got about 12 inches from the table to the top of the blank. And you can see here, this will go up maybe another 2 or 2.5 inches, so I can cut maybe a 14-inch tall blank on this bandsaw. If it's bigger than that, I have to go other ways. So once it's cut in half, And in this case, I cut it and I already sort of roughed the corners off just by eye on the bandsaw. I have this little piece of plexiglass that I took and I scribed a bunch of circles on it and drilled some holes. So if I so the nice thing about this is I can adjust it, and if there's some flaw somewhere, I can move the circle and I can see, you know, where a bowl will be, and then I can do further trimming if I need to. So, but I take a little center punch or something and stick it in there, and then I can use that as a pivot point and use a pencil to draw a circle if I want to trim more carefully. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not, to do the trimming. Now for larger logs, like this is probably maybe a 24-inch log. I used to have this little thing that I built to set it on. It sat out in the weather and it eventually rotted away, but that was pretty handy, and it allowed me to be able to evaluate the log. So what I'm looking for is what do I see in the grain, and what do I see on the outside? Am I finding knots? Am I finding damage somewhere that I'm going to have to be aware of? And I have to make a decision about where do I want to cut it. Did I want to roll it over and cut it, or is it good to cut it here? Is it an oval log, or is it some way? What kind of bowl do I want to try to get out of that? So you make those decisions and then cut away. Sometimes you have to go in from both ends. I've got I forget if it's an 18 or I think it's an 18-inch chain in my saw. So even for a 24-inch diameter log, so if it's 24 inches in diameter, I'm going to make my blank longer than that to give myself some room to trim the ends if I need to for whatever reason, if it starts to crack or things like that. So I'd have to come in from both ends with that saw. But once you get it cut, then you can take a look at the inside and see what you got. So this is walnut, and now we can see we've got the heartwood and the sapwood, and this was some sort of a branch or a bulge. Maybe it was a broken branch that healed over. And so now I'm looking at that and saying, okay, well now where do I want to take the bowl from, and what can I get from that? And here's another piece. This one was probably from that first log I showed you that was 24 inches across. So here's a piece of poplar that I cut recently, and it's standing up on my little outdoor bench, and we're going to turn that into something. So it right now is 17 inches long and 14 inches wide, and so I lay it down and I find a center. And the center, you don't have to find the center. You're evaluating again what the ends look like and what the rest of it looks like, and finding a place that you think is a good place to go. So then I use a big caliper to make a circle and take away the waste with the chainsaw. And so here we've got part of it cut, and here the rest of it is cut. So now we have a reasonably round blank, and it doesn't have to be perfect. These are some walnut ones, that are a little bit rougher, but you can turn that stuff away. It doesn't have to be a perfect cylinder. And I never want to cut up too much stuff ahead, because as soon as you cut it, it starts to dry and then it starts to crack. So if I have these and I don't get to them by the end of the day, then I put them outside. I'll spray them with water, cover them with plastic to try to keep them wet until I can get to them. And invariably, I don't get to them for another week, and now they're all moldy. It's just the way life is, right? Let's talk about grain patterns as we're looking at these pieces. So here's a bunch of little balls, and here's some parts and pieces, and all those pieces are up here, and you'll get to take a look at them in a minute. So where how does a bowl cut out of a log? So here's a log. Here's the end grain, right? Here's the center of the tree, somewhere over here. These are the growth rings. This is the bark. So this is a bowl. Some people think that the tree is growing this way, that you're getting a bowl out of the tree like that with the bark around the ring. You can do that, but it doesn't work very well for anything but really small stuff. because what happens is all that shrinkage and that pith in the center, it starts to crack, and it's just totally unstable. So this is the way that you want to go about it. And what happens when you have the bark on the outside of the bowl, right? So here's the outside of the bowl, is that you have a figure on the inside that looks something like these things. So you notice you've got this spot over here and a spot over here, and then the grain kind of weaves in and out. You know, here's a similar situation. It's a little different, but you know, it's that same type of thing, right? This is the upside down view, and you know, again, you can see, you know, that the grain is not centered on the bowl, and that's not necessarily a problem. But if you do want to have a different grain pattern, then you can set your bowl up to be bark on the inside of the bowl. And when you get that bowl done, you see how symmetrical the grain is now, and it goes down to, you know, kind of a very, so it's a very calm grain pattern. And on the underside is what that looks like. So what are the advantages and disadvantages? Well, so if you want to get a bowl this size out of that chunk of log with the bark out, you can do it. But if you want that same size bowl with bark in, you can't, because look what happens. You run out of wood, right? So then you have two choices. You either have to make a deep bowl with a smaller diameter that'll still fit within that space, or you make a wide bowl with a lot shallower depth, because that's all you have, and if you make it any deeper, you run out of bark. So, you know, all things that you're sort of thinking about as you're going ahead with this process to decide what it is you want to make. Now, people like natural edge bowls, and that's the way these are made. So here you've got your log, and you're turning a bowl with the bark on the inside, but the side comes up. Now there's no side, but there's this, and so that's what you see here, is that pattern of the top of the end grain. So here's the end grain of this bowl, and this is the natural edge that you would find right there. So that's how the natural edge bowls are cut. So then we're going to rough turn. So we take our blank that we cut to sort of a semi-round, and we drill a hole, and we're going to mount it on. So now I've got my chuck mounted on the headstock, and we're going to screw that hole onto that screw that's trapped in that chuck. So here you can see it's almost tightened up. There's a little screw right there, and here it's now tightened on. And because I've used a chuck with large jaws, it's quite stable. If I used a smaller diameter jaws, I'd have more tendency for that piece to not be so stable. But the larger footprint of the chuck means that, you know, it's got a good purchase on it. And those threads on those, oh, I don't have the thread part for this. So again, here's the center, and if we turn it 90 degrees, this is the way the tree was growing. So now I've got it running, and I take my bowl gouge and I turn it sort of sideways, and I start to take away a little bit of material in the center just to get down through the bark to solid wood. Why I want to do that is so I can slide my headstock up and advance the quill and put that tail center right against that blank, which now becomes trapped. Even though it's being held by that chuck and that screw, it's trapped between 2 points, and it will not come off inadvertently on me, and it will be much stabler as I'm turning and I'm getting a lot of bounce because it's uneven. So it's much safer and easier. You can see here, you see all this ghosting that you see? There's sort of like something that's there, but it's not there. That's because of this. So here I'm turning and I'm cutting in, and I've got wood, and then I've got air, and then, you know, and then wood. So every time I hit one of these places where there's no wood, the gouge kind of goes in, and then when it continues to spin, it hits and that's what creates that bounce. But it's also what creates that ghost, because you're seeing places where there's no wood, and then you're seeing places where there are wood. And that's what I watch when I'm turning. I watch that ghost to see how I'm doing. As the ghost changes and it becomes more solid, I know I'm getting down to the point where I'm almost in solid wood. As this is getting closer. Now, the goal is to be able to turn the outside of the piece and then reverse it on the lathe and then hollow the inside. So, do we want to have a tenon or a recess? This is a little technical, but here's a recess where the chuck fits into that hole and the jaws expand into it to hold it. Or now this is a foot, and it isn't a tenon, but it's a similar type of thing where the jaws would attach onto it and compress it in order to hold it. I like the tenon method a lot better for a number of reasons. I just feel it's more secure, and if you're in the recess and you're tightening it up to make it safe, sometimes it just splits the bowl, so that's not good. These are the three bowls that are here. That, as a matter of fact, I can pass these around too. So this is this little one, which was done. This is the one that's got the bark on the inside, and I'll start that there. And that was turned with a tenon. This is another one with the bark on the outside, and it has a tenon. And then this was bark on the outside with a recessed fastening. So that's the second one, and that's the third one. So this is the other thing with the recess, is with the tenon, I can get access to have a foot on my bowls, and with the recess version, not so much. So you tend to get a lot more bowls that are flat bottomed like that, and I don't like those as much. So here we are. We've got our bowl, pretty well rounded over. I've got some material here to make a rim lip or a detail at the top. I've got enough here for a foot, and then this is going to be the tenon. So again, here's the center. The growth rings are that way. Here's the tenon, and notice that it's like a dovetail, so it's sloped down, and this is square, and so that jaw is going to grab it right there. And now I can move that tailstock away, and I can take that blank off the chuck and mount it in the jaws. And here you can see that there's a dovetail on the inside and the outside. So this can fit into that dovetail recess, or it can trap that dovetail tenon and hold it while I'm turning. Here it is in place, and that fits nice and tight down into that corner. So now we're going to turn the inside. And so we first start out by flattening off the top. And, I see where I am. Okay, yep. So I flattened off the top. This was the screw hole that was holding it that the chuck was holding it on. But now I want to drill a depth hole. So this picture, I've done two things. I've drawn the thickness of the wall, and I'm now drilling a hole to the bottom of where I want the bowl to be when I get a rough turn. So the wood is going to shrink, and you have to account for that. And the rule is you want to have your rough bowls be 10%, the wall 10% of the diameter of the bowl. So if this is a 10-inch bowl, this is going to be a 1-inch wall. And you'll see more about that in a few minutes why. So I'm drilling the depth hole, and then I start to hollow it out. So I'm hollowing the center, and I'm hollowing out to the edge a little bit, and taking a little bit more, and down into the bowl now a little more, and now I'm going down, making a few steps, just making progress, working from the outside to the inside. And so here you can see, here's the gouge, and it's rolled over kind of on a 45-degree angle. And so it's cutting. The bevel here is rubbing against the wood. The cut is happening right there at the tip of the gouge on the opposite side, on this side. And there's a chip coming out, and here's the chips that I'm getting. So they're nice, solid, long, curly chips, which means I've got a sharp gouge, and it's cutting the wood, and the wood is soft enough to be able to be cut. So there's another progress. Now I've found the bottom of that hole, and so now I'm worried about figuring out what the thickness of the wall is and blending that into the bottom so I don't go too deep. And there's that done. If only it were that easy. It doesn't happen quite that quickly on lathe. But that's it with the piece stopped. And now what I'm doing here is I have a set of double-ended calipers. So this end of the calipers is pinching the bowl, and this end here, which you can't really see in the picture, there it is showing me what that thickness is. So I'm sliding that from the bottom to the top to see whether it's consistent. I want the thickness to be consistent in my rough bowl because it'll dry more evenly that way. And there's that little bowl, rough turned and done off the lathe. And so, you know, it's a rough object. It's going to be finished turned later after it dries, but it gives me options for changing the shape and for dealing with the rim and the details at the top. So I take it, I scrub it off with a little brush and hose off the debris with water, especially if it's faulted, because I want to try to get rid of any, you know, stray mold and stuff like that, to allow it to dry without getting too crazy. Now, all those bowls were roughed above the bed on the lathe with the headstock down at the other end. If I have a large piece and I want to make a bowl that's too large to fit on the lathe, I can slide that headstock down and have the bowl hanging down beyond the bed, and I built an outboard tool rest that I can use to hold my tool while I'm doing that. The problem with this is that there's no tailstock support, and the blank is big and heavy, and so I wind up with a lot of vibration, and it's a lot harder to control. So I need a bigger lathe is what it comes down to. Right, Jen? So, but the steps are the same, you know, you go through the same steps. Now, a piece this big, you say, well, geez, that's a lot of waste to hollow out that whole thing into chips. So there's a way that you can core this. So here's my outboard tool rest, and at the top there's a thing that fits in here with a knife with a curve on it, and you can bore into that and pop out a whole section. And so now I can get multiple bowls out of that same piece, which saves wood and also gives me a chance if I want to have, you know, multiple bowls with the same color and the same grain pattern, which can be fun. And here you can see the way that knife is trapped. There's a gate here that holds it from tipping over, and it goes down, and the tip of that knife is right at center where it needs to be cut. And here's 3 walnut bowls that were cut that way. So, you know, similar shapes and grain patterns. So drying the rough turn bowls is fun, not really. So remember before I was talking about shrinkage. So here's a rough turn bowl looking down at the top, right? This is the wall thickness. Now what happens when that bowl dries? The red is the dry bowl, okay? So if the grain is running this way, this bowl will not shrink in that direction, but it does shrink in width, all right? And so whatever that width is on both sides is going to move that outside wall in, and in order to get a round bowl out of that oval bowl, we have to have enough wall thickness now to be able to have that go all the way around. So that's why you're turning that oversized wall thickness to begin with. And there's the finished bowl compared to the beginning rough bowl, just in terms of how much material you're losing. So once I get that rough bowl turned, I need to dry it, and there's a couple of ways to do it. You know, big bowl operations have a kiln that they put a bunch of bowls in, and they've got guys and they're making, you know, 50 or 100 bowls a day. I don't do that, so, and I don't have a kiln. So the way I started was by putting the bowls into a cardboard box and filling the box with shavings that I had just turned off the bowl. And because the bowls are wet and the shavings are wet, and the box is closed, it slows the evaporation down, so it allows the bowl to dry evenly and to move without cracking. If you leave it out, the outside dries before the inside, and the outside wants to move and the inside doesn't want to, and that's what causes it to crack. So the problem with the shavings is it's just a mess. And so I started with paper bags. I had a surplus of paper bags, and I would put the bowls in the paper bags and put them in the box and then fill in with newspaper and other kind of scrap paper, and that worked better. The other problem with the shavings is, you can see, here's a bowl and bag, you know, after a while it gets kind of grody, and so there's a lot of mold and there's a lot of, you know, nasty stuff in there. Now if that's in there all over the shavings and you're digging the bowls out, you've got stuff flying all over the place. So here, it's a little bit more contained, and I try to do this outside. And, you know, but you get some pretty funky pieces sometimes, you know. So some of this is small and some of it is mold. And, you know, if that's probably been in there too long, I probably should have taken it out from time to time and changed the bag. But I'll sometimes take them out like that, and I'll scrub off the mold with bleach and a soap solution, and then I'll rebag them and put them back in. But what I do is periodically I take them out and I weigh them. And when they stop losing weight over the course of time, I know that they're at equilibrium with the surrounding humidity, and that they're not going to now change shape anymore because there's no more shrinkage. There will be a little, sometimes they gain weight. You know, if you weigh it in the winter when it's dry and then you come back the next summer, it actually gains weight because it's picked up moisture and it's a little heavier. But these are ones that were already dried that are now ready to be finished turned, and I've got them in boxes. Notice I have all the boxes numbered, and that's because I'm anal enough to have made a database to track this. So every bowl that I make, I have the date, and I have a bunch of other information like where the wood came from, and when I turned it, and how much it weighs as I weigh it, and so it's a project for really, really anal people.
Is that a spreadsheet you made, or is that a commercially?
It's not a spreadsheet. It's a database. Yeah, it's made in FileMaker Pro. I'm on Mac, so FileMaker Pro is a Mac application, and yeah, I created everything you see there. So now we're going to finish turn. So here's a bunch of bowls that were rough turned and left to dry. Now they're out of the drying box and they're waiting to be finished turned. And here's a bunch of smaller ones waiting for the same thing. My shop doesn't always look like that. This was just happened to be a day that I was changing boxes or something, but I thought it was kind of fun. And so here's a large bowl out on that exterior outward thing, and it's dry and it's ready to be turned. So we do the same thing that we did with the rough turn. We start with the outside, and I turn it to whatever final shape I want, and then I work on the inside. So this was a challenge because the bowl was so deep that I had to double up my chucks. I chucked one chuck into another chuck in order to get the bowl to be able to spin without hitting the lathe. And so now I'm turning the outside. And if you look closely, you can see there's these lines right here. This is tear out of the grain from the rough turning process that I haven't gotten rid of yet. And you can see it's a little groove and it's got a little bunch of torn stuff. You cannot sand that away. You can, if you stand there and try to sand that, you're going to wind up with a very misshapen bowl. It's going to sand away all the softer, spalted material before it gets anywhere into the hard stuff. So you have to be able to cut or scrape that all clean before you start sanding. So considering wall thickness and rim details while you're finished turning, that's where the final shape and thickness of the bowl happens. And it's important. So here's a couple pieces that I have up here. So this is this one. This was cut in half. So sometimes you want to cut things in half to see what you've done. Now when I was teaching at Green Mountain College in Pulteney, wood turning, I taught there for 10 years, I used to do that. As we were starting the class, I would do a lecture and then do a demonstration, and I would turn a little bowl like this. This actually, I think, No, this was turned off. But about the same size. And, you know, they would watch, and I'd be showing them what they were going to be expected to do. And then I would say, okay, let's go. And we'd go over to the bandsaw, and I'd cut it in half, and they would all scream and gasp because, you know, they think this is like the most beautiful thing they've ever seen. But, you know, it's important because you want to see what you've done. And I'll send those around in a minute. So here we have one of these bowls, and it's kind of got a straight side, and then it's got a little bit of a curve into the bottom. Notice that the wall starts out a little thick, and then it gets a little thinner into the base. This one is much more so. This is thicker at the rim, and thinner, and then thicker at the bottom. And notice that the inside comes back in on itself, so it creates kind of a flare there. And spalted maple. So this spalting is this black lines that happen, and that's a fungus that's in the wood, and different colonies of fungus are competing with one another, and they create these barriers between each other, which is actually very hard. It's like a mineral deposit, and the patterns that you get are beautiful. So, and then this one is the third one. So the three of them together. So this one is kind of got a little bump in it, and this one is okay. This is my favorite one in terms of the feel. So, you know, I'll pass these around. You can feel the three of them and see, you know, hold it like you would hold a bowl, and just feel at the side, and you'll see what I'm talking about and what I'm trying to get to with the spalted one. You know, it's a subtle difference, but I think it makes a difference when you're handling the bowl. So here's the finished bowl. This has been finished turned on the inside and the outside, so now it's all ready for sanding. And I tend to apply my finishes while I have the bowl on the lathe. So I don't turn the bottoms off until I'm done with finishing, which can be a problem because sometimes things go awry. And you wind up having to, you know, sand the whole bowl back down or whatever. But here's a bunch of bowls that, you know, are finish turned, and I've applied finish to the insides and the outsides. I take it off, I let it sit and dry. I put it back on the lathe, on the chuck. I sand. It's a lot easier to sand when the bowl is turning on its own than it is to sit there and do this, you know. And I put as many coats of finish on as I want. Here's a bunch of things. There's some little weed pots here, upside down. Here's a couple hollow forms. This, in fact, is that red oak hollow form that's over there on display. And this one, I think, is also over there. So just, you know, waiting for them to dry.
What's your finish?
It depends. I use a variety of things. I've spray lacquered some pieces that require it, you know, like hollow forms that are never going to be used for anything but display to get a gloss finish and a nice smooth finish. I use Waterlocks a lot, which is a polymerized tongue oil product. It's very tough. It's essentially a varnish. I'm using General brand bowl finish, which is it's also a varnish, quick drying, builds a little quicker on the surface. And I'm using tried and true polymerized linseed oil, which is a nice finish on one. It really, you have to put multiple coats in, so it soaks in, and gives it a nice luster. So here's a bunch of things. This is a very large walnut hollow form that I made. All the wood that was inside that form came out that little hole, and that was tedious. So, you know, a variety of things. I'm always working on multiple things at one time, hence the need for my database, because as I'm doing things, I'm keeping track of what I've done. Now, I might put 2 coats of finish on that, and that might sit there for 2 or 3 weeks before I get back to it. Well, what did I use? And how many coats did I put on? I can't remember that in the end of the day, never mind 2 weeks later. So, you know, the time spent on the database was well worth it. Now, after it's all finished, then you want to bottom it off. This is not finished, but it's a good example. I have these large jaws that I made out of plywood that I can put on these trucks, and they have these little rubber bumpers, and so that traps the bowl and allows me to work on the base without marring up the finish too much. This bowl has got a finish on it, and it's fairly large, and you can see I'm out on the last hole almost with my little bumpers. And this one is large enough that I had to put the bumpers on the inside and expand it into the bowl in order to be able to trap it on there. And then I have a really, really big set, which when I'm outboard turning, this bowl probably was just a little too big to do over the bed. And so I don't trust just the little bumpers to hold it on, so I've used stretch wrap to wrap it all on to hold it while I work on getting rid of the tenon and detailing the base. So sometimes things happen. So, you know, you turn through bottoms, you know, you turn through the sides, you have a catch and shatter it, or you know, whatever, things break, you know. But I have a wood furnace, and so everything I make, I can either get heat or money for. And that's it. So thank you very much. Yeah, we've got 15 minutes if you have questions. As a matter of fact, if there's anything you want me to go back to explain it more in depth, or